Okay, so now we're getting started on the panel discussion, and I'd like to thank Jennifer and Darren and Keith for participating in this. This is our chance to broaden the discussion a little bit, bring some context into it, hopefully help other clubs understand the issues that you've got. Hopefully a lot of it has already been dealt with in the talks. Obviously, Jennifer's talk had a lot of detail in it, and the intention was to help you understand some of the issues, not to train you to be a taxation expert, but to give you the resources to go away and do a little bit more investigation. But the panel discussion is really to get to a point where we understand a little bit better about when we leave this meeting is, well, what do I have to do next? And if we could keep the questions along those lines so that we can all learn from them, that would be really good. Now, I remind you that as I said earlier, the seminar we had last year was very informative on a lot of the things that you will need to be doing, understanding issues such as mutuality, understanding issues around ABNs. A lot of that information is in there, so we've got those resources available as well. And as I said, we'll share those on our website so that all of this and the recordings that we're doing are readily available so that you can either share them with other people or go back through them in more detail. But clearly the slide pack that Jennifer's put together on behalf of the ATO is intended to give you a lot of that detail, a lot of the links, because it all exists on the ATO website already. You just got to know where it is, and I think that's going to be one of the learning experiences that you've got, is to go away. Don't be afraid to go to the ATO website. Don't be afraid to subscribe to some of the things that are important to it, but also follow the help that they've up there. But let's continue on the discussion. So we had somebody with the microphone. So let's continue on with the panel discussion we had before.
Jenny, David Whitcomb, I'm the treasurer of the Fenton GT Club in Geelong. Just a clarification on charities. Now, in our example, we have two charities, Peace of Mind, which is brain cancer support, and Camp Quality for Kids. All we do is we donate a little bit of money occasionally, and we provide our cars for runs for the support for brain cancer people, and we may pay for their dinner or their lunch if we're out on a day. Is that what's classed as charity in terms of that? Because that is all we do. We sometimes donate money to them, and it might only be $1,000, $2,000, or we may pay for lunch, and it might be $800 and take them for a ride.
So, but are you a registered charity? Is your not-for-profit a registered charity?
No, we're not.
Right. So if you're not a registered charity, you don't have any obligations with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. That's fine that you're making you're providing that service to Peace of Mind and Camp Quality for Kids. They are the charities?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm not quite sure. What is your question then?
Well, we don't have to register. We're not registered. We just give money to them.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So what we're trying to determine, are we caught up in this? I think we do have an ABN, but we will check whether we have to report, because that's
so.
I
would suspect that both of those organisations, Peace of Mind and Camp Quality for Kids, I'm pretty sure Camp Quality for Kids they would be DGRs, which means that they can actually receive deductible gifts from donors. So any donation that you make to those charities is deductible if you are lodging an income tax return, for example.
We don't have to go for that.
You are not the charity.
Yeah, you're not the charity.
No, that's right.
Yeah, you're not the charity. You're just making a gift to a charity.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it does all help if you do have income that takes you above the $416. For example, just ballpark numbers, if you've got more than $10,000 in the bank, you're probably going to earn interest of about $416 thereabouts in a year. If you have that much money coming in as interest, but you've got other donations like you just spoke about that are tax deductible, that'll bring you back under 416, and you won't have taxable income above that threshold. So it's all important to understand those sorts of things, because your taxable income can be offset by all of the deductions or the non-mutual expenses that you've got. So that's where you need to understand your tax payable. It's not necessarily all of the revenue that you bring in. It's not necessarily all of your interest, because it can be offset by other expenses that are deductible, just like it would be with your personal tax.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we only have 100 members and we raise $6.5 grand a year in membership fees, and that's it. You know, we've got a little bit in the bank, we try and give it away, and that's it.
Well, you're one of those examples that would probably do all right, but we can't work on probables. So one of the things we need to understand when we walk away today is, how do I go away and understand the truth about what I think? It's not, we don't want to get caught up in not-for-profits don't have to pay tax, right? We've understood that that's always been the case, that they do if they need to, but a lot of them may not need to. But you've got to be sure which category you're in, not just assume.
Thank you.
Colin Cooper from the BSA Club. You're talking about taxable income. I think there's probably a lot of clubs here who derive their income from membership income only, which possibly and probably makes them exempt of income tax. But could you give an explanation of some of the events that give rise, other than bank interest and so forth, that give rise to clubs being assessed with tax?
Thanks, Colin, for the question. Really great question. So can I just correct you on one thing? And I want everyone to walk out with this very clear in their mind. Even though, so remember I mentioned earlier that it's all about where you're deriving your income from. And so if all of your income is coming from mutual receipts or membership fees, right, it doesn't make you exempt income tax. You're still a taxable not-for-profit, right? So bearing in mind, you can only be income tax exempt, right, if you have charitable purposes registered with the ACNC, or you meet one of those 8 categories. So if, for the purposes of this explanation, we make the determination that all of you here are taxable, right? It's unlikely that you're going to meet one of those 8 categories, and none of you are registered with the ACNC. So you're all taxable. So then you need to work out how, what your taxable income is. And in order to do that, you need to work out, what's your mutual income, what's your mutual, expenses. Is that greater or less than $416? So that $416 threshold is really the litmus test. If you're above that, you need to lodge the income tax return. If you're below that, the return not necessary. So some of the things that, other than membership fees, we've talked about interest. You can have, so a lot of not-for-profits, maybe it doesn't apply to this club, but a lot of not-for-profits are quite asset rich. They have, club rooms. They have, a lot of mixed events, for example. Then you have clubs that have, gaming rooms and things like that. They provide subsidized meals, drinks, all of that. So that's where it becomes a little bit more complex, and you need to work out what, income is being derived by, from your members, and what income is being derived from non-members, for example. I don't know, Darren, is there anything that you want to add to that?
No, look, the way I look at it is very simple. It's anything that's non-member income is taxable. Sure, you will have some deductions that will be offsettable against it, but that's, if you just look at it on that basis, you'll be on the right track.
Yeah. It's really good to think about, because what sort of solidified it for me was, think about, if you've ever visited an RSL club, and you have to sign in if you're a non-member. Like, that's how they, understand who is entering their premises from a membership, non-membership perspective. And I think when you are working out your taxable income, what we have advised not-for-profits is that, you need to take a reasonable approach to apportioning that non-mutual income versus the mutual income. So if you're having an event where you have both members and non-members attending that event. Often you will see not-for-profits, on the invitations, they will say, are you attending as a member or are you attending as a non-member? They might even have different price structures, but that all helps them apportion that non-member income that they might be receiving. And I think as long as you are taking a reasonable approach to that apportionment, and you can show that you've taken a reasonable apportionment, I don't think that you've got anything to fear. And so remember when I said earlier, keeping good records? So keeping good records might be, so you've had an event, you've made an apportionment decision, but you've made an annotation in your diary or wherever it might be to say, this is how we have treated that event to work out what the non-mutual income was. That is keeping good records. So it doesn't have to be like really complicated.
Just on that too, there is some great guidance on the ATO with regards to the ways that you can apportion it. I've just got one that's at the back of my slides, which Mark is going to send around. And it just goes through a whole heap of different types of transactions and how you can potentially apportion.
Yeah, so I was going to remind people that slide deck from last year includes a lot of these examples. So it was on the slide deck that we sent out following last year's seminar, and that discussion of mutuality. There are a lot of examples in there, and I think Darren and his organisation did lift that from the ATO, so they can share the responsibility for that explanation. It goes on for many pages. So you can go through that and get a really good understanding of what mutuality actually means. What is mutuality-based income and what's not mutuality-based income. So in terms of understanding that bit, you need to, those resources are available to help you do that before we get into, well, what do we need to do in terms of accountants, but for your own purpose, it will be really helpful to understand it in your own mind.
Just a question about events. We hold a vintage tractor rally and tractor pull every year, and that is our main source of income for our club. It's open to the public, we charge admission. When you're offsetting, obviously that would be taxable income for us as a club. We would offset our expenses, and obviously there would be whatever is left over from our expenses on the day is our profit. Can you attribute any in-kind working hours from your voluntary members towards an expense to offset that net profit?
No, the answer would be basically no.
Although the apportionment is if you spend some of the money on dealing with members of the public,
Yeah.
then that would be a non-mutual expense that you could offset the fact that you invited the public along, you had parking expenses to have people to manage all of that, and depending on proportion of public versus not members involved in using that service, then you could or should be able to apportion those expenses as being either non-mutual or
so all of the costs,
yeah.
So whatever you include in all of the costs of running that event, you can claim as the non-mutual expenses against the profits earned.
But no in-kind hours of work.
No, not volunteer sort of.
Thank you.
I'll take the opportunity to discuss some of the questions coming up in chat. There's one here, and it was answered in chat, but it's worthwhile bringing it up here. The question was asked, if we need to lodge as a taxable not-for-profit, do we require tax file numbers or will our ABN suffice? And somebody else out there then responded, if you have an ABN, don't you automatically get a tax file number? And the answer to that is?
Yeah, you should have a tax file number that that's linked to your ABN. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to find out what it is. But what we've got obviously as tax agents, we've got the ability to drill down and get into that. And you need to get someone involved in having a look and being able to identify that for you. But a tax file number is very necessary for the lodgement of any income tax return. So.
Next question.
Pat, you mentioned on Fiat Car Club. When you're linking your tax return to a non-agent, you've still got the 15th of May 25 deadline. So if your club doesn't have an agent, you can still lodge that by the 15th of May.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Yeah, not-for-profits have a concessional due date.
A taxable not-for-profit.
Yeah, a taxable not-for-profit has a
Okay.
concessional due date. Yes, that's right.
And they don't need to be linked to.
They don't need to be linked to the agent.
Okay.
So remembering, so not-for-profits are unique in the tax system. So there are a lot of concessions that are provided to not-for-profits that go beyond the income tax exemption, also with respect to due dates and things of that nature as well.
Okay, so if you don't have your MyGov ID linked at the moment, because I don't believe our clients ever lodged a return, probably not required to lodge. But if you're not linked, could you go through the process of how you do that?
So the best way of doing that is you will need to be a person, so a person has to use their own MyGov ID.
So in the club, who would that be?
It has to be the authorised contact.
So if there is no authorised contact at the moment,
You need to complete one of the change of registration detail forms.
The first thing would be for the club to decide who's that going to be. Typically, that's going to be treasurer. Right, so if it's not the treasurer, it's quite possibly going to be the secretary as the public officer of the incorporated association. But the club needs to decide who it's going to be, and then that person needs to go through the process of getting their ID linked to the club. ABN.
Yeah, so even before you do that whole thinking about, even before you go about thinking about getting your MyGov ID, you need to work out who your authorised contact is. So don't even bother, right, going into the system and trying to work it out, because it will throw you back out. Because only an authorised contact can actually link an ABN's organisation in Relationship Authorisation Manager to get access to online services for business. So the key is that you are the authorised contact. So if you don't know, so if you are an appointed authorised contact and reflected on the system as the authorised contact, no problem. But if you are not, right, and you don't know who that might be, you will need to lodge a change of authorised contact form with the ATO, which is that NAP 2943 form that I referred to. Now, ordinarily, to lodge that form, you had to order it, from us. Then we would mail it out to you. Then you'd fill it out. Then you'd mail it back to us, and then we input it in the system. But to make it easier for not-for-profits, for the very first time, we have actually made that form available as a downloadable PDF form from our website. So you can go onto the web pages that we've indicated. You can actually complete it online. You can't submit it online. We will do that in a couple of years, but you can't do it at the moment. But you can complete it online. We actually prefer that you complete it on your computer. Once it's completed, print it out, mail it to the address that we have indicated. Then our staff, it'll take them a little bit of time. They will update those details, and then they will confirm once your details are updated. Once that is done, you can actually do the whole linking of your organisation's ABN. Now, if you have an opportunity to see that form, it says that only an authorised contact can complete that form, right? Now, because that form is a PDF form, it's like sacred, we couldn't change it. So in our guidance that accompanies that form, we've said it's okay if you are a newly appointed authorised contact and you have evidence that you are a newly appointed authorised contact, you can complete that form. We won't jail you. just put the evidence at the back and mail it in to us. Does that make sense?
And that evidence would be minutes of a committee meeting appointing you to that role.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the alternative, go back, is to lodge a paper return.
No, oh yes, you can lodge, for income tax return, you can lodge a paper return, of course.
And that means we don't need any MyGov ID.
You don't need a MyGov ID, but it will take you longer. And I have to say that we are encouraging not-for-profits to get digital ready. I think it is a way of doing business. It's an easier way of doing business. Now, can I also say that for many not-for-profits that haven't got their details up to date and are required to get their details up to date, in this, period, it's going to be a little bit challenging, right? Because, you need to fill in the papers, get it through to the ATO, we need to get it back to you, etc., etc. So I'm not going to lie, it's going to be a little bit of effort, right? But once it's done and your authorised contact has access to online services for business, that contact can make updates very easily. It only takes a few minutes. And so what we're proposing is that when not-for-profits have their AGMs, where they spill their positions, that the current authorised contact gives access to the new incoming authorised contact using online services for business. So you don't have to lodge that NAT 2943. So if you get those processes in place as part of your normal governance handover processes, it'll be relatively easy. And over the next few years, we will continue to integrate, some of these really cumbersome things that not-for-profits have to do into our natural systems, but it will take us a little bit of time.
Okay, so understand that. Now, in this instance, with our club, it's got a substitute accounting year, which doesn't end on the 30th of June. So if it's not, well, obviously would not be approved, hasn't been approved by the ATO, can the club elect to lodge on a financial year basis, even though it prepares its accounts on a substituted accounting period?
Yes.
So we could still do that.
Yeah. Sure.
And definitely you can do that. So the ATO have got their systems in place, whether it be a not-for-profit or a company of any style, and you can have a financial year end of 31 December, still lodge 30 June every year is not a problem at all, and the ATO is fine with that.
And what do you recommend? Just have it changed in your constitution so it all aligns, or not worry about
it really is your choice. It's totally your choice, but I find for ease of everything, it's best to have the financial statements aligning with your tax return, so much more easily explained if questions get asked one day.
Okay, and in the event that you do incur a loss from non-member activities, I take it you can carry those forward to the next year, correct?
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on to the next one, I just want to go back to one of the things that's been discussed a couple of times already, and I think it's a consequence of our movement. I look around the room and I'm among you. I'm retired, don't work anymore. I don't submit tax returns anymore. I've got no real reason for the ATO to know who I am, hence I've got no real reason for my MyGov ID. But take it a bit further, I'm a treasurer of the club. This is not me, I'm speaking hypothetically. I'm a treasurer of a club. I've been a treasurer of that club for 20 years. I'm now 85 years of age. I'm not really into computers. I struggle to read a phone. What options have I got to do things without necessarily going down that path of MyGov ID? How do I handle the situation? I'm being phased out by the new world.
I'm a hand Like I'm dealing with this question at the moment, and look, it is challenging us. But what I will say is that whilst our preference is for not-for-profits to deal with us digitally, we do know that there are some cohorts in the not-for-profit sector, indeed in the broader business sector, that are going to find it difficult. So we have actually made available in this interim year, and then we'll consider it going forward, a phone lodgement of the new reporting requirements, as well as the income tax return can be lodged using the paper form. What I will say is that we are working with can I call them the senior part of the population to work through how we can support them to meet their obligations when they find themselves in this position. What we've tried to do is make it as easy as possible, right? So I think from a new reporting obligation perspective, we've tried to make it as easy as possible. Where we see opportunities to influence the lodgement of an income tax return for the not-for-profit population as well, especially if it's the taxable, income tax return or the return not necessary, we will influence that process as well. So we are aware of that demographic. We are working, I can't mention who we're working with, but we're working with a number of groups that have this issue with a view to resolving it. So I suppose all I can say is watch this space as we continue to work through it.
In the meantime, I guess it's fair to say that the rest of the people on committee may need to help out with that process. It doesn't mean that just because your treasurer is 85 years of age and you've worked out the accounts for your small plot on a piece of paper.
Quite frank. If you take on a position for a not-for-profit and you're a taxable organisation, you have an obligation. So you need to, even though we don't say anything about fit and proper test, you need to be able to meet those obligations. So if you need to lodge an income tax return, you need to be able to lodge it, right? So irrespective of age, it doesn't mean that you can't hold that position, but you need to source someone to assist you in, undertaking that duty. It is your responsibility as an office bearer to be able to meet those obligations, irrespective of age. But it doesn't mean that you can't enlist the support of your other members on the board, or indeed your kids, or whoever it might be, to help you to meet those obligations. So I think, this notion that, there are a lot of senior people running not-for-profits, absolutely there are, but it doesn't mean that they can't get assistance from other board members, or indeed even the ATO, to help meet their obligations. At the end of the day, the law has been the law since it was set. It hasn't changed. You still need to meet those obligations. Our role as administrator is to make it as easy as possible for you to meet those obligations, but we can't get rid of those obligations.
Just saying that's where an external.
We need a microphone if you're going to ask a question. But I'd like to thank Jennifer for that answer. It was a difficult question and a good answer, I think. And so if we go back to the person with the microphone, and if you've got a question, please ask for the microphone before you
I
ask.
think it's working, so I'm pretty right. You've got Tony Murphy. Tony Murphy's the president of one of the largest truck clubs here in Australia. But I'm affiliated with America. So I don't have an ABN, I have an ACN. So my concern I've got, and this is where AOMC is going a little bit backwards here, particularly when we're doing risk management. I do so many truck events per year, I've got to have more than $416 in the bank account to turn around and do it. So it's another thing, a big brother playing the fun police again and making it hard for organisations to actually run. And that's what I'm sort of looking at, because at the end of the day, yeah, we'll probably have to do a tax return now, but I'm just interested with an ACN, what percentage I'm going to pay.
Tony, are you Tony?
Yeah.
Oh, you're taking it. I don't know, the answer, to that. But what I will say is, again, I'll just reiterate this, the law hasn't changed, Tony, right? Like, the law hasn't changed. The reporting requirements, the new reporting requirements that are coming in for the vast majority of not-for-profits are actually just getting everyone to reset and look at what they should have been doing all along, right? So this is not about Big Brother coming out and trying to catch you out. This is not about catching anybody out. It's just making sure that all not-for-profits in the sector are meeting the obligations that they need to meet with respect to the law. So if you're a charitable not-for-profit, you need to be registered with the ACNC and meet all of their obligations. If you are a taxable not-for-profit, you have always had to lodge an income tax return if your income was greater, if your taxable income was greater than 416 bucks. That has never changed, Tony, right? If you haven't been doing it, you haven't been meeting your obligations, right? So unless you want me to go back and get you to lodge all of your previous income tax returns, I suggest you probably think about that this is an opportunity for you to get it right going forward, right? Honestly, it is an opportunity for all not-for-profits to get it right.
I understand that. I run a non-profit business. It's called small business. We've got flooded out in 2022. So I've got plenty of tax deductions from my own business, but I'm just looking at it from the other side. And that's the reason why I'm firing those sorts of questions, because I'm seeing this happen numerous times with government.
So are you saying that you have a not-for-profit, but you also run a small business?
Correct.
Yeah, well, they're
Where do
two,
you get, where do
they're
you-
two separate organisations,
I know.
right? So as a small business operator, you will have, distinct responsibilities and obligations as a small business owner. And I know small businesses are doing it really, really tough. But let's not confuse the obligations of a small business with a not-for-profit. They are quite separate.
I understand it
Yep.
quite different. I don't have a problem.
I would rather the conversation continue with the microphone, please.
John Washburn. Well, I'm just wondering, can you tell me, is it possible for a club to change its purpose to come from a non-for-profit to a charitable situation?
Is it possible for who to change its purpose?
For any club to change from a non-for-profit to a non-for-profit for charity?
Oh yeah, of course. Change this at any time. But it needs to then reflect that in its governing documents, and then it needs to meet all of its obligations, right? So of course a not-for-profit can become a charitable not-for-profit, but in order to become a charitable not-for-profit, you need to meet one of the 12 charitable purposes that are outlined in the Charities Act. And you need to be registered with the ACNC and meet all of their obligations. So it's not as simple as I have charitable purposes and therefore I'm a charitable profit. You actually have to be able to meet one of those 12 categories, and then you have to apply to the ACNC, the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. They register you on their register, and then there are a whole lot of obligations that you need to meet there.
Thank you.
Okay, so before we move on to the next question, I'll ask one of the questions coming up in the chat. And it relates to, can you have multiple contacts? Somebody else said, I've just gone through this. It needs to be the associate. The authorised contact cannot do it. I'm the authorised contact, I cannot link. Not quite sure what all of that means. But then follow up with the question, can multiple authorised users within the one club manage and send information into MyGov Digital? Do you understand that question? So that's relating to
I think I understand it. So the ABR is what governs it all, essentially, with regards to authorisation. So that's the first port of call. So if you
the ABR being the Australian Business
Australian Business Register, that governs it all. So You've got to have that right. And can you have multiple contacts and authorization on the ABA? Yes, you can. You can definitely do that. Mhm.
But if you,
All of the people that do that would need their own MyGov ID
yes,
to become that contact.
If they were wanting to do something, that's correct. There's a
It's
kid.
not the organisation that has a MyGov ID, it's the
No,
individual.
no,
person.
individuals within the organisation. That's correct.
We ready for another question, Catherine?
Jennifer, Stan Snyder's from the Dandenong Valley Historic Art Club.
oh, hello, Stan.
Jennifer, this is an easy question. How deep is the ATO gouge for taxable income? Let's say under 50,000. Or is that a hard question?
So what do you mean? Can you be more specific?
How much tax is payable on a taxable income, let's say of $50,000 or less?
All that.
$25,000.
We have to know.
50,000 is taxable.
5%.
12.5.
So while we're asking the questions then,
So that the members here have a basic understanding to do a little bit of mental arithmetic if they do have a taxable income or can identify one readily.
Yeah.
They know, oh, this is going to hurt to the figure of $8,000 or $10,000.
so on your expenses.
I said taxable income.
Also the tax.
Taxable income.
So Darren can address this.
$50,000 taxable income. What's the gouge?
15,000.
Sorry,
15,000.
15,000.
Okay, so the answer is in the notes from last year's presentation.
Essentially 30%.
Yeah.
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 So it's about 30% of the taxable income. Once you get above $900, I think it was, then you're paying about 30% tax on that taxable income. But remember, that doesn't include the membership fees and everything
I
else.
understand that. I said taxable income.
Taxable income.
Yes.
So you're making lots of money from the public, or swap meets would be another example. Then all of the income that's attributed to non-members is taxable, and that's where that tax rate comes in at around 30%.
Excellent, thank you.
Hi, I'm Jo from 60s American Muscle Car Club. Just a question, now that we've been told the threshold is $900 and it's 30% of income above that. Now, if you've never put a tax return in before and you're hit the first time you put a tax return in, how far back at the tax office going to go? So how far back do you want to go?
Joe, thank you for a really great question. And you'll recall that I mentioned earlier about our transitional sort of approach. So I have said that we are taking a practical compliance approach, which means that we are focusing our resources on the 23-24 income year going forward. As the tax administrator, I can't tell you not to lodge previous years, right? Yeah. But what I am telling you is that we are going to focus our attention on the 23-24 financial year going forward, right? Unless there is evasion or fraud. So, Joe, that's what I can sort of say. We have worked with, taxable not-for-profits. So we've been working with them for the last couple of years that have been transitioning to taxable. And they have chosen to lodge prior year's income tax returns because they were quite significant, right? So again, we will assist you. I have sort of said that this is not being driven by, revenue. We are taking a practical approach. If you find that you are in a position where you do need to lodge prior years, we are also offering deferral of lodgement, so there will be no penalties applied to previous year, lodgements. And if you have a taxable income amount that needs to be paid, we are, also taking a practical approach there and, remitting any GIC, general interest charge, or penalties that would otherwise been applicable. So again, it's about getting it right going forward. So when we say that we're taking that practical compliance approach, it's not only that 23-24 financial year. If you find that you need to lodge prior years as well, and there is tax owing, we will remit penalties, general interest charge, and give you additional time to lodge those returns. Jenny, I know your name.
Billy Reid from the FBK Holden Car Club. I'm sorry to shoot the messenger. Before the COVID payback scheme started, I'm sorry, did I say that out loud? What was the, you say $416 or $415, sorry, $416 was taxable, the profit for car clubs or for non-for-profit organisations. What was it previously before this scheme?
Hasn't changed.
So, you need to lodge an income tax return if you're operating in the Australian tax system. If your taxable income is greater than $416, that has always been the law, and it doesn't apply just to not-for-profits. If as a company you're earning, a business you're earning less than $416, it's a return not necessary.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'll take the opportunity to ask a question and come up in the chat. On the ATO change of details form, there are two fields or positions, authorised contacts and the associate. I've spoken to the ATO, and to be able to link the club to your MyGov ID, you must be registered as the associate, not the authorised contact. Does that make sense?
I think that's probably, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, so it's the associate that then authorises the other contacts. So the associate is the primary person. Yeah.
Wording sounds odd. I tend to agree that the associate authorises the authorised contact. It sounds weird, but okay, that's the way it is. That's the clarification.
Yeah, I can't change those words. I can change a lot of things, but some things I can't.
Just Jenny again, just referring back to those not wanting to log against their own MyGov for their club, you can go through an authorised tax agent as well. So if you don't want to be the tech savvy person, don't forget you can use an account. So it's not just about you can fill out a paper form if you want, but also use your tax agents.
So let's bring up that conversation. What do small clubs do that have struggled to find the resources? I mean, they might have 20 or 30 members in the club. Clearly don't have enough revenue to pay $500-600 a year for an accountant. What options have they got available to meet these obligations?
Well, it's a bit of a tough one because there is a little bit of cost associated with that, quite a bit of cost associated with that. But look, if you've got any members in your clubs, and you put the word out to members in your clubs that might have someone with that form of knowledge, as I said, the option is open to lodge paper returns. I would be a little bit reluctant, especially for the first couple of years, to do it without someone with a bit of experience overlooking it. I wouldn't be doing it by myself, but just to get someone that at least have a look over what you're doing to check that you're on the right path. There's quite a bit involved from a taxation perspective. There's quite a lot of boxes to fill out, even on a paper return. So, and you've got to know what you're putting, and you've got to know that you're putting the information in the correct boxes. So,
You're signing off on it.
and you're signing off on it. You're the one that's going to effectively be putting your name to it. So, if you go through a tax agent and the tax agent signing off on it, They have the professional indemnity insurance as well. Sure, you'll still sign off on some of the information that's provided, and you're still a taxpayer, you still have obligations, but you do have a little bit of protection that way.
Thank you, Mark. Two questions. I'll go back to Jennifer if I may.
Sure.
My question was regarding clubs which do not have ABN. Could I rephrase it and ask, why do we need an ABN?
So if you're operating as a business,
As a incorporated association.
and yes, you need an ABN. It's a requirement to have an ABN.
It says an enterprise, not a.
I don't understand that. Taxation said that we didn't need an ABN unless we're making profits.
So generally the way that looked at with requirements for an ABN is if you're operating business-like activities. So I don't know specifically what your club does and what the roles are, and what the purpose is, but specifically how it generates its revenue, how it generates its profits, etc. If you are operating business-like activities, you are required to register for an ABN.
The wording we had in last year's seminar, just to expand on that, if the association is going to be involved in activities consistent with running a business or has the intention of providing monetary gains to its members, which I hope we're not as incorporated organisations, then the club is required to register for an ABN. So as long as you're not running a business or you're not setting out to make money to hand to your members, maybe you don't need an ABN.
Our rules state that we can't distribute to our members.
So you're clearly qualified, and as long as you're not, then you're fine.
I might chat to you after we finish.
Thanks, Gilbert. Second question is to Keith. Keith, regarding our the AOMC group insurance policy that's being drawn up at the moment, how will risk assessment affect that policy? Those policies?
That framework's being created at the moment. So we will require, or the insurer and underwriter will require, certain elements of risk assessment to be taken place by all insurance policy holders.
Because our club Bass Coast did contribute to the risk assessment questionnaire, and so it will be part of the insurance.
Correct.
It needs to be, because we need to put a framework around it that enables the insurance companies to quote. And they need to understand their level of risk. And if they can be satisfied that we're managing risk, then they'll give us a lower policy price. So it's in our interest to be able to demonstrate to them that us, the AOMC, and all the individual clubs that are participating in that insurance scheme are managing their risk. If they're not, then the price for everybody is going to be higher. So yes, that's a constraint. That is something we're working through, and it's a good discussion about risk, because that's one of the things we've all got to manage, because at the end of the day, when it comes to insurance, you're paying for lack of risk control.
And Darren, can I just pick up on one of your points? To be an incorporated association is a risk management exercise as well, because to be incorporated does give you certain protections as a club. So the club has chosen to be incorporated, so there's certain protections that are obliged. Part of that obligation in making that choice on an operating structure is also the compliance risks, the compliance obligations, the ATO, for example, that you need to honour along with that structure, the ABN, the lodgements, etc.
Scott Darby from the Mercedes Car Club of Victoria, Mercedes-Benz, I should say. Jennifer, just a question for you. With all of the increases that we've got in using MyGov, we're very aware of our succession planning, we're very aware of club strategy. When I've seen an increase in using things like MyGov and registering and all of the activity, it's usually followed by increased taxes So from a strategic planning perspective and from financial risk, do you think that's something we should be considering in the future? You haven't got a crystal ball, but do you think down the track there'll be an increase in tax level on car clubs that maybe we should be getting ready for?
Look, that's a matter for government and policy. We administer the law, so I can't make any comments with respect to that.
All right, just wondered if there was any clues coming, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith, Ian Lane, Fenton Club. Risk management, if we participate in an AOMC event like British European show, do we rely on the AOMC risk management process and policies?
The AOMC has a risk management process and evaluation associated with running that event. Your club has obligations as well. We will do our part to make sure that the venue is as safe and as well signposted, the traffic management is in place, all of those sorts of things. But by the same token, your club participating, if you have a member participating who you know your car's going to catch fire or something like that, you have obligations as well. Risk management is a holistic process. It's done at all levels by all participants.
Can you clarify with the rate of tax? Are we lodging a company return for an incorporated association?
Yes, that's it.
And when you're looking at the rates, are they subject to the same provisions as companies?
Yes, they are. In fact, I was just about to correct one of the things I said when I was asked before about the rate of tax. So in most cases, I'm assuming you would be what's considered a base rate entity which is turnover under 50 million. So the tax rate would actually be 25%, not 30%, as I said before. So it'll be $12,500 on the $50,000 case.
Just following on from that, if your feels like a refund. So it would be 25% if your assessable income is less than 80% of your passive income. In this case, so they're taxed as if they're a company, and under the same provisions.
Not the same provisions. You get neutrality.
Yes, but what I'm saying, under the tax rate, if your company is deriving passive income, you're at 30% or greater than 80%. You're deriving a passive income, and therefore your rate is 30%, not 25%.
Yes.
So we're only looking still at the same company provisions in determining passive and non-passive income. Correct?
That's correct. One thing I'm not 100% sure of in how it's dealt with, because I haven't seen one as yet either, but I assume it's a specific box on the tax return, is how they work out. Like, let's say your profit was $500, how they work out it's 55% on the excess over 460. So, yeah, I'm not 100% sure of that at this point.
Don't ask that question.
So you'd still be checking whether it's a base rate entity or just
Absolutely.
Same company tax.
Absolutely, you would, and that's an assessment you need to make on the tax return.
Okay.
So Pat, if you've got any particular questions like that, I'm happy to receive it in the office and send it to the relevant area to give you and maybe through Mark an appropriate response, because this is probably beyond what I've got sort of experience and knowledge in going into the income tax side of things.
Question for Darren and Jennifer, just a quick one. Mentioned our club before, Fenton GP Club in Geelong. We only have members, and we have an annual raffle which we raise, and we give all of the money raised, and it might be $1,500, $2,000 to our two charities. Is that income earned?
It's income earned, but you still have donations as a deduction. So you're still not paying any tax.
Good.
Yeah. If you do sell raffle tickets to a member, there would be mutual income as well. So you would have to go through the process of identifying it. And what's really important with regards to the mutuality principle, and everyone needs to be considering this when they're even on every transaction that's going through their books, is where things are being allocated. So it can easily be dissected by either the tax agent or by you for your tax return. I've heard there's an auditor in the room before. By the auditors, they're going to need to be across it as well. So really, you really need to be getting your bookkeeping right from day one to make life a hell of a lot easier for you.
Hi, my name's Diane from the HSV Owners Club. I've just got a couple of questions, if I may. In the very beginning, when we lodged for our ABN and our tax file number, we received those. At that time, we were advised that we didn't have to do tax returns by an agent. So obviously, we haven't been doing tax returns. But what we do is we have to, on a yearly basis, register our income and expenses with the Consumer Affairs. So does that mean we still need to do tax returns?
Yeah, Consumer Affairs, that's a lodgement that has to be lodged, I think, within a month after your AGM, which covers off on income and expenses, but totally different organisation, totally different system. A tax return still needs to be lodged.
Do you remember that slide that I showed you around the administrators and regulators of not-for-profit? So the ATO is at the Commonwealth level, so that's who you lodge your tax return with, but then many not-for-profits have responsibilities at the state level as well. And so Consumer Affairs, the lodgement of those reports are at that state level.
Can I just ask, though, did you say that you were advised that you didn't have to lodge tax returns?
Right.
That's interesting.
I want to make it quick.
We'll with the microphone, please, Tony.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've heard that a lot, actually, Diane, that many not-for-profits say, oh, but when we first set up, we were told that we didn't need to lodge an income tax return. That's probably because the advice was based on the fact that your taxable income was going to be less than $416, right? And so technically that's correct. You don't need to lodge an income tax return, but you do need to lodge that return not necessary, right? So really all we're doing is reinforcing what should have been occurring all along. Now, the reason that the return not necessary is really important for those organisations that have taxable income less than $416 is that if you don't lodge that, we will be sending out, reminders to lodge an income tax return. And so we send out one, we send out two, and then on the third one, you'll get a failure to lodge notice penalty. So it is important that if you are a taxable not-for-profit, you are lodging either that, return not necessary, which might have been the case, depending on what your taxable income is, or that income tax return.
And a reminder that what's kicking in terms of the reporting is reporting of the current financial year that ends on 30th of June in a week or so's time.
That's right.
I'm talking about reporting of the last 12 months.
Yeah, the 23-24 financial year.
Now, before we go to another question, I'd like to ask a more general question, might be relevant to a lot of clubs that are wondering what their accounting methodology should be to be able to do some of this reporting. I think Darren's probably the one to start the conversation, but I'm not sure where the answer is really going to come from. And that is, what systems are appropriate to prepare annual reports and to calculate taxable income? I mean, I can think of software such as Xero, QuickBooks, MyOb, but for small clubs, that can again be a prohibitive expense to consider on an annual basis. So I assume also at some point for the smaller clubs, getting down to spreadsheets, but at least with some expertise being used to make the right decisions in it. But can you comment on how clubs that vary in size from 20 or 30 members don't get a lot of income in a year? They might not even charge their members money, so they don't have a pool of funds. So what in particular can the smaller clubs do that would satisfy that requirement to do reporting? And I'm not just talking income tax, because I am talking the reporting to Consumer Affairs, which is also an obligation if they're incorporated. They're not going to be doing GST, but if they've got any other reporting on top of that, but in particular today's topic of they find they're a taxable not-for-profit, how do they justify, for example, sending in a return of tax not payable?
Sure, a lot of questions in there. I'll try and remember them all. So in terms of systems to use, look, I used to be a treasurer of a football club. I developed, obviously with a little bit of accounting experience, my own spreadsheet to track income and expenses, but a spreadsheet is fine in terms of a small organisation with limited transactions. When your transactions start to get large, then it just becomes an impossible task to use use spreadsheets. Does that satisfy in terms of information required? Well, if you're under 250,000 turnover, you are what's called a tier one organisation. So all your reports just need to be classified as true and fair, that you provide to both your AGM and to Consumer Affairs and to the ATO, right? It needs to be true and fair. So in terms of calculating taxable income, that's a separate what do they call it? A separate beast, if you like. Because whilst financial statements are important in determining taxable income, there's a lot of ins and outs that need to be considered. So what I said before, it comes back to your bookkeeping and getting things classified correctly from day dot. So you don't need to incur and that's exactly why I did a spreadsheet when I was in charge of the football club. You don't need a zero or a mile. They're very good, and for the most part, for any organisations of a decent size, for the cost that's involved, I think that it's essential that you do have such a thing. So, will they generate the financial reports that are required? Once you get over the 250, you are up for additional obligations. One is that there needs to be an independent review by an accountant under the auditing guidelines. Over $1 million, which is going to go to 3 million next year, by the way. Then you have to be audited. So and they will go through and they need to set that the accounting standards are applied, the auditing standards are applied. So obviously you need a much more sophisticated system with regards to that. But a spreadsheet for me, fine for a small organisation. And then you just need to have it in an acceptable format to present to your AGM. Consumer Affairs are fine with that. The ATO is fine with that. The ATO don't need formalised financial statements. Not that you submit them, but that will form the basis of their review if they ever do come and review you. Did you want to say something?
And when you're doing that review, obviously you need to go back to cover the past 7 years or whatever of record keeping, away from what we're hearing from now on. But in 7 years' time, you will need to be able to backtrack to pick up those reports and records that you had.
So 7 years is the guide. 7 years is the guide. That's gone.
Where's the cable?
Okay. Yes, 7 years is the guideline for incorporated associations with regards to keeping records. The ATO actually are much generous with that. They'll only go back 4 years. But as said before, any fraud or evasion, obviously they can go back as far as they need to.
Can I add to that just on a different level? We talked about risk earlier. If you've got your membership databases as well as your financial records in something like a Xero or a Mile or something to that effect, you're minimising the risk of losing your members' contact details, or your members not renewing. You've got some control and some monitoring over those elements as well. So you've got to look at things holistically.
Can I ask, Maureen Ross, Vintage Drivers Club, can I ask, are there some categories that we should put on a spreadsheet that you would recommend that we could pull out, our mutuality and our non-member? Now, are there any categories that can be recommended to help small clubs?
Yeah, you could definitely do that. So are you talking about, sorry, can the microphone go back for a second, just so
Expense categories and
yeah, so are you talking about for events, for example, which might involve members and non-members, or just more a general approach?
Okay, this is one of my other clubs that I'm a member of that I'm thinking of.
Sure.
It's mainly member driven, but we do have some advertising in magazines. We do get a little bit of non-member and we do get a bit of interest. We could throw us over the $416.
Yes.
But how should we account for it on a spreadsheet to be able to split that out? Is it just good to say it's advertising, or is there a particular way we should actually note it on that spreadsheet?
Well, something like advertising,
That's obvious.
that would be non-member related. So that's clearly defined.
Yeah.
So it's more the distinction for the income and expenses that aren't as clearly defined and that do need to be apportioned. And what's the best way to do it? I would have thought that you have a separate, not a separate spreadsheet, but maybe a separate tab which does the split with regards to the mutuality. Because the financials that you might have, for example, income from one car event, which you might want to show in your financial statements. That's how much we made. $10,000. Okay, but if you have a separate spreadsheet which says that 50% of it was mutual and 50% was non-mutual, then that would definitely help from the tax perspective. But that doesn't necessarily need to be displayed in the financial statements.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say I was staggered, because I'm hopeless with numbers, that the figure for the cut-off point is $416. Is that correct? And this has been the case for a lot of years, apparently. When is it going to be made more realistic?
Not indexed.
That doesn't matter, government. Yes, that's all. But I'll take that feedback on.
Yeah. Right to your local member.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, Richard Well, Oswald Club. We're an incorporated club. Probably come in the category, well, not probably, we do come in the category of smallest club. Don't have all that many members. We only derive our income from membership fees. We are incorporated. We don't have an ABN. Listening to discussions, I'm still uncertain whether we should have ABN. When we're probably not going to have to lodge a tax return. I realise we are a taxable club, but we do not derive income from members. So there's no reason to be lodging a tax return. One, do we still need an ABN? If we don't have an ABN, we still have to send in a letter saying that we've self-assessed as non-taxable.
Sorry.
They answer a lot of good questions.
You do not need to lodge an RNN, return not necessary, or an income tax return, right?
Right.
You basically, you're not captured by any of the taxation obligations. In establishing whether you need an ABN, I just heard Keith say, so what do you do with your bank account? Because
We've only got the one bank account, we've got about $10,000.
and is it like an individual's bank account, or is it in
No,
a company?
we're incorporated, so it's
So
in
the
the,
bank account would be
it's in the pub name.
yeah.
I was going to bring this up because there's a bit of a lack of clarity there as to whether people have got an ABN. Maybe they're not aware that they've got it. But it comes back to the question of if they're incorporated, is it automatically assigned, or how does
You do have to apply for an ABN. I wasn't under the impression, like Keith was, that incorporate, so I will research that. That incorporated associations have to have an ABN. My understanding was always that, as I said before, that if you're running business-like activities, it sounds to me like in your case, from what you just said, that you would not be required to have an ABN.
No.
Banks, however, these days are getting very painful with regards to this process and demanding ABNs for many companies, entities that do not require an ABN because they're not in business. So, so banks are a problem. If you are earning interest, are you earning interest on a bank account?
I don't believe so, no.
It can be difficult when dealing with that. If you're earning interest, then if you don't have a tax file number, then the bank is required to withhold tax on that.
Yeah.
So that might be a cause for it, but given that you're not earning interest, I don't believe that you're going to necessarily have a problem. But we will look into this issue around incorporated associations.
Thank you.
They don't need to have.
Business register, if you go onto the websites and you go into the Australian Business Register, it actually stipulates, and we always go back to this, that not everyone is entitled to an ABN, but you are entitled to an ABN if you are, and there are 3 points. You've got to be carrying on or starting an enterprise in Australia. And so enterprise has certain, definitions. So you've got to look at, what that incorporates. You've got to be making supplies connected with Australia's indirect tax zone, which goes to the heart of the GST. And you've got to be, you're entitled to an ABN if you're a Corporation Act company as well, right? So again, but like as, Darren mentioned, the banks usually require you to have an ABN to open a bank account. And also, you could be, even though your income, your income is mainly member derived, so you're probably not transacting with other organisations that may require you to have an ABN when you're transacting with them, because I think withholding comes into it if you don't have an ABN.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Can I just get some, all right?
Too many questions.
hard question?
I just want to get some clarification. We've got advertising as well. We've got some advertising that comes through, and some of it comes from members' businesses, not the member themselves. So is that classified as a member-related income or non-member?
Short answer is no. So no, the way that it's looked at is that their member effectively is an individual.
Correct.
Given that the advertising income comes in from the member's business, there is a taxable obligation with regards to that.
Okay, so but if it comes from the member individually, then that advertising is not part of that assessable income.
if it comes from the member individually in the capacity as a business, is that?
Yes, yes.
So it's an advertising revenue. I think you still got a problem. I will just double check that.
No, that's fine. And I was just wondering how you do it. And also where that advertising is located is in a magazine, which goes out to 500 members. Sure. How do you allocate the cost of that magazine cost to your 500 members and your advertising? Because your advertising is identifiable, your member subscription is identifiable, but what sort of mix would you reasonably allocate? And have you had that position in?
I haven't had that position in the past. I would have to come down to as you said, a reason. I would have to come up with a reasonable conclusion with regards to that to be able to substantiate it.
And clarifying with the sale of merchandise, remember, sale of merchandise would generally come under the it's not accessible.
Correct.
And others would.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're approaching 12:30. We didn't have a fixed time that we need to end it, but it's around about now. So I want to get a feel for how much longer are you comfortable to continue on, given that we can't go all day. There's some people probably would like to think about leaving from 12:30 onwards. Maybe get a show of hands from people that intend to still ask a question. Give us a gut feel. One or two. Okay, let's go through that, and then we'll look at winding up the seminar. I think it's been really useful. There's obviously more to be done, but let's take a few more questions, and then we'll finish up.
My name's Reece from the Monaro Public Victoria. We're having a nationals later on this year, so we've got people from around the country, and we've got a mixture of income from those nationals. So we'll have our member entry fees, we'll have merchandise sales, we might have some public entry revenue. We don't have a system to accurately allocate those to the different types of members. So what would be your advice on a way to apportion that income in those different revenue streams to members versus non-members?
Yeah, look, a very difficult one. You've probably got cash coming through the books and all that type of stuff, and it's hard to identify the sources of the income and expenses. We know what the proportion is. So there just needs to be some form of reasonable allocation with regards to it. And you might say, for example, I'm plucking things out of there because I don't know the makeup of how many non-members go to it, but you would have a pretty good idea that, for example, 70% of the people that are coming to the event would be members. So that by definition, then 30% would not be. And you haven't really got any other mechanisms other than maybe doing if you like, a door entry with regards to the quantum of people, which you could do. You could definitely do. And as mentioned before, you know what happens with regards to those when we go to the RSL clubs and all that type of stuff. You have that mechanism for tracking the members versus non-members that are coming through the door. And that would be probably the best way to allocate. Then you're going to say to me, well, okay, but how do I know what a member spends versus what a non-member spends? Well, then it becomes, I think if you've got that reasonable basis by the people coming through the door, I think that you could quite reasonably allocate on that basis.
I was thinking more probably because of the percentage of car entries. As your 70-30 example is, so we have 70% members cars, 30% other cars. If we use that as a guide, what's the evidence we need to provide the ATO that those figures are right? A diary entry or something like that, would that satisfy?
Yeah, if you just had something that in your records that identified that was the assessment of the day, then that would be more than sufficient. I will say that there's a lot of areas in tax law where the ATO do rely on what's a reasonable allocation, and they're very generous with regards to that, I must say.
Can I ask, that question was about an example like a national rally, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So from my experience on that, national rally involves, like in the club I'm in, Victorian club organising an event that people from New South Wales and Queensland and WA, that sort of thing, attend. So in terms of the money going through our books, sure, we're getting money from members outside the club, but if that national rally is effectively a break-even event because we've got no intention of making money for it, there's no income to be taxable from it. So if you, correct me if I'm wrong in any of this, but if you've got money that comes in from New South Wales club member, not one of yours, well, maybe that's deemed to be a taxable revenue, but you also had expenses because you had to feed them, you had to do everything else to organise the event. And if at the end of the day you made no money because it was a break-even event, it's fairly clear cut. It doesn't matter how you cut it, ins and outs offset each other, and there's nothing to add to the taxable income pile. But I mean, you probably need still to have the bookkeeping to show that. But it's not something to be super worried about. It's just a way of you need to be aware of what you've actually done and be able to report it if you get asked a question.
That's correct. And look, there might also be occasion where certain expenses relating to event are actually for non-members, right? And not actually for members. I can't think of any off the head, but if there is, you know, that's a straight out deduction. So you've got to really be conscious of it and really be thinking about it when you're entering it through your books.
An example of that would be having to pay a first aider to attend a public display that was part of your tour. You didn't actually charge any of your members or the non-members to come along. It's all members of the public. If you've got first aiders there because you're required to, because the council said you did, as part of the permit to be able to park your cars on the oval or whatever the case may be, that's an expense that could well be a deductible expense. So yeah, it's an interesting topic, and it just highlights the fact that you don't necessarily have to be super worried that all of the money that comes in is taxable. You can offset it with other costs quite legitimately. Just got to do your bookkeeping to make sure you can justify what you've done.
One last question, I think.
Just returning to APNs, in the case of businesses, it's often $75,000 is the threshold for requiring an APN. Does the same apply to club?
The 75,000 actually relates to GST registration, not ABNs. So if you turn over $1 from business income, you are required to have an ABN. Okay, but the turnover with regards to GST registration for not-for-profits is $150.
Grant Tasker, representative Owners Club. We just recently held a 50th birthday convention, and the club had major fundraisings for probably 12 months leading up to that. And that money was directed to offsetting costs for the convention on behalf of the participants. So a lot of the meals and functions they went to, the club had picked up. So in one sense, that's revenue coming into the club, and then another sense, but of course, a lot of that money would have gone to non-members who were also participating at that event. How does that sort of pan out?
So So you got a scenario where you've been generating income, and that income has been then used for the benefit of both members and non-members. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct, yeah. Including that would have been merchandise sales to both as well.
That's funny. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Yeah, I might have to think about that one. I'll pop Mark an email on it.
All right, so I'd like to wind up, but I would like to ask one more question, and the answers can come from anybody in the room, it can come from the panel, it can come from the members on the floor. I'm sure I want to ask the question, but I'm not sure I do. What more might the AOMC do to support its members in this change process? Right, so from our perspective as an organisation that you're a member of, what sorts of things do you consider we could do, bearing in mind we haven't necessarily, or we don't have a financial license to doing, accounting and all those sorts of things. But what sorts of things do you think as an organisation we might be able to do to continue, not just in the change process, but going forward on a more permanent basis? What do you think we might do? And from the panel, what do you think we should be doing?
For a start, I think you should advocate to increase threshold to $460.
I'll take that as a flippant comment. You need to take that up with your local members.
Okay, Richard, back again. I'm going back to the first talk. Not the one about the tax and what have you, about governments and clubs and what have you. And I reckon, right with most clubs, when we do code of conducts and all that sort of stuff, is probably reactive than proactive. Probably because a lot of clubs it's a daunting task and committee will sit down and we need code of conduct, you've got a blank bit of paper and where do you start? It would be good if there was something like the incorporation association with moral rules. You've got somewhere to start. Let's print them off or have a look at them. Do they apply? Do we need to? It's a lot easier to do a few adjustments. That doesn't apply, but we do this. We need to put a clause in that rather than starting with a blank bit of paper. And it just gets too hard. So it doesn't happen to, like, say, Defence Club, when something happened, you're forced to do it. It would be good if it was a bit easier for clubs to be proactive. It's like, well, we maybe.
Which activities have you got in mind?
Well, even the code of conduct. I know our club hasn't got a code of conduct because it would, luckily.
But technically speaking, I haven't heard code of conduct being required.
It's not required.
From an financial reporting.
No, that's what I said. I was referring back to the first talk before morning tea. Yeah,
sorry.
The risk management and whatever.
So Richard, I'm happy to put our code of conduct that we've adopted on, which is on our, I believe, is on our website.
It could well be on.
And more than happy to have people.
It's not something that I've really thought about.
Let's face it, no one needs to reinvent the wheel. If you can beg, borrow and steal
That's what I'm
within reason, it's good guidance. And we will do. We did that when we did our code of conduct. We looked at what was around, what's relevant, what works for us, and came up with something that worked for the AOMC. And we'll do something around the risk management outside of insurance requirements around some templates and things that'll make things hopefully a little bit more easy.
So one thing I've thought of that we as an organisation, the AOMC, could do, you may have noticed when you have an AGM, in the last 12 months we've been doing this, when you have an AGM, we pretty much, and we know the month of your AGM, we follow up with an email asking, did you have any change of contacts? Because we want to keep up to date our own contacts database. It's really important in terms of making sure that's accurate. So we could extend that, given that following the AGM, the suggestion has been made that you should review your purposes. You should do a couple of things on a regular basis. So a fairly small thing we could do is in that reminder that goes out, just put in a few comments there of don't forget to do these couple of things. Have you reviewed your purposes in the last 12 months? It doesn't matter when you do it. It's not something we can control, but maybe just a reminder that these are the sorts of things you should be looking at. So we could add to our messaging those sorts of things if you think that would be helpful as a reminder. Otherwise, in a year or two, it will be forgotten again. And then one day you'll get the strife and say, oh yeah, should have done it. So maybe those sorts of things, we can have a think about what we do, but I was interested as an organisation, is there something more that you think we should be doing?
Just in relation to the code of conduct, we sent ours out about 6 months ago to all the delegates to apply, obviously, to us and the delegates to attend. Got about 3 replies back, and we did make some alterations. They were very sensible replies. Yeah, so that's on our website.
That does bring up a point, though. So they were sent out to the delegates, and the people we have in this room are mostly, I believe, the presidents, vice presidents, secretaries, and treasurers. Make sure your delegates are passing on this type of information. We're not necessarily targeting absolutely everybody with these. We do rely on our delegates to be the conduit from us back to your club. And in the reverse direction, we do want the clubs to give us feedback. So if you're not getting those messages from us, or you feel there's more that we can do, work on your delegates. Make sure your delegates are actually passing that information on.
Your delegates are your voice, they are your conduit. So, empower them to be all of that.
Okay, so let's maybe take one more question because the hand was already up, and then we'll call it for the day. One more question.
Hi, Katie Hamilton from the Morris Mining Car Club. What I think the AOMC can do to advocate for us in terms of the clubs, especially with the ATO, is maybe to push for the fact that we run for the benefit of the members in a similar way to a lot of sporting clubs. And unless I know a lot of sporting clubs run gambling things as well, we don't do that. In terms of the Morris Minor Car Club, we have a balance of $10,000. We're actually doing things to stop us from having to lodge a return. So putting funds into a check account rather than a savings account so we don't have interest. Things that are just, a little bit illogical for the benefit of the members. So I think the AOMC could suggest that maybe we should be exempted, like sporting clubs, like community organisations, because we only run for the benefit of the members.
And we often, I'll agree with that, we often do things that can be treated that are aligned with things like the men's club do. It's a reason to get people together. It's a reason to be able to communicate with them. It's a reason to provide a community. So we do those sorts of things. But unfortunately, I think it does come down to what's our primary purpose, and that's where maybe we can look at that as to how that might work a little bit better for us. So good point. We'll take that up at a committee level, see what we can do. So it's time to wind up. I'm going to give our guests a chance to finish up, and I'd particularly like to say thank you for everybody for participating. It's been a really good discussion, and I think it's gone really well. So if I could hand over, at least firstly, to Jennifer.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. And thank you to all of you for your really, really great questions and your engagements. I have taken note of those advocacy points, but as I said, it is our role to administer the law, and that's what we do. And so can I leave you with just a couple of points? So at the ATO, we remain committed to supporting all not-for-profits in meeting their obligations, because we acknowledge the really important services that they provide to the Australian community. So if you walk out with nothing else, walk out with the notion that we are here to support not-for-profits in meeting their tax obligations, all right? We're not here to try and catch you out. And there are 3 things that you can each do. Make sure that your details are up to date. Like, that is absolutely critical for all not-for-profits. Review your governing documents and purposes at least annually, and make sure that you're meeting your obligations. We will make a checklist available for all not-for-profits soon, and stay informed. That's my last one, but thank you very much for having me.
Right. Yeah, for me, look, just put the time in and into making sure that you've got your systems right. Liaise with the appropriate people. Reach out to your members who have an accounting background or taxation background. Make sure that they should be able to help you out with regards to most of the issues that come up. So as you're not not laboured with such a, for example, a huge taxation fee with regards to it. So just get it in on and make sure that you're recording things. Make sure you have reasonable basis for the mutuality. Thank you.
And for me, it's about recognition and awareness from a risk perspective, whether it be the ATO obligations, running events, being a member of a club. It's just about having your eyes wide open and not putting your heads in the sand.